so much for joining us today. We'll ask you to press star 2 to mute your line so we can minimize the background noise. We will be making a video of this so folks who couldn't join us can review it. So that will be really helpful. Thanks so much. So I'd like to welcome everyone today. We will have time at the end for questions, so I will prompt you to unmute your line at that time. We've got a great webinar lined up for you today. The title of the webinar is Community-Focused International Development, looking at Canadian cooperatives in international development. And so we've got some excellent speakers. We've got 4 speakers today, so we've got a packed agenda, and we want to make sure that there's time at the end for your questions. But please note in your GoToWebinar menu that you have an option to submit your comments and questions or raise your hand, and I'll invite you to use that function as well. So this webinar today is exploring the goals, activities, and the impacts of the Canadian cooperative movement on the communities that they work with internationally. So we've got 3 organizations that have co-authored this publication that you see on your screen, and the organizations are Développement International Desjardins, SOCODEVI, and the International Department of the Canadian Co-operative Association. And so they've all been very active in cooperative development internationally, and we'll have an opportunity to learn a little bit more about that today and dig into a couple of case studies as well. And also in response, we've got Dr. Darryl from York University, who will be able to speak from his background of researching cooperatives. If you just joined us, please press star 2 to mute your line. We've got a little bit of background noise. That's star 2. Thank you. So the organization that's hosting today's free public webinar is the Measuring the Cooperative Difference Research Network, and we're a pan-Canadian multidisciplinary research network. So we here at the Canadian Co-operative Association, we serve as the hub for this pan-Canadian network, and this is myself, Erin Hancock, the coordinator of this network, who is hosting today. We're funded by the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada, and we're looking at various aspects of the cooperative difference, the economic, social, and environmental impacts of co-ops on Canadian communities and internationally as well. Each year we offer at least 6 free webinars open to the public, so we invite you to visit our website and register again for webinars that are coming up. So some of the webinars coming up, we'll confirm the dates soon. We've got methodologies for capturing the impact of co-ops on their communities, so looking at social and economic methodologies, how is it that we can capture these kinds of things in our cooperatives. We're doing one on large cooperatives and employing the cooperative principles, or exploring whether the cooperative principles are a hindrance to business development. And then we're also looking at the history of ethnocultural co-ops in Canada and the U.S., and we've got a publication linked to that one as well. Okay, so we have, like I said, 4 speakers today. I'll go ahead and introduce the first one, and then I'll introduce the following before they speak. So we've got Michaud, who is the Director of Market Development at the Canadian Co-operative Association. He is responsible for growing CCA's work internationally by building relationships and pursuing business opportunities with non-governmental organizations, foundations, international financial institutions, private companies, and governments around the world. Previously, he led a team of 20 people at a Canadian government institution that promoted democracy and human rights globally. He's also managed development programs in Eastern Europe and for 3 years advised a cabinet minister. So we want to welcome Michaud to take it away, and if you've just joined us, please press star 2 to mute your line and save your questions for the end of the presentation, or submit them to me via your GoToWebinar menu.
Thank you, Erin, and thank you everyone on the line for joining us this very, very cold afternoon in Ottawa and in many other parts of Canada, I suspect. I'd like to focus the beginning. I'm going to introduce our webinar today basically on the subject that we're talking about, and I'd like to do it by looking at 3 questions. The first one is a little bit existential in nature, and that's why are we even talking about this now? Why are we even considering the role of Canadian co-ops in international development? And if we agree on why we're talking about it, well then, why is it that co-ops are important in this context and in this discussion? And if we agree on why we're talking about this and why co-ops are important, well then, why in the heck are Canadian cooperatives an important part of this conversation? Why co-ops from this frozen country of Canada in January? Why are they making a difference in countries around the world? So let's get to that first question of why now. So why now? I'd like to note at the outset that the reasons why we're talking about this now are not necessarily new. I mean, these things have been more or less on the international agenda when it comes to international development for the last 15 or 20 years. And they're all interrelated to a certain degree. But it's important to highlight them. And the first one is our changing economic and social conditions. Two main points underneath this. First, and it won't be a mystery to anyone on the line, is the recession that hit in 2008 and that we've been remarkably slow to recover from in industrialized countries. That's not new to anyone here. The second thing, and it's something that Darryl has actually written about, that is our final commenter today, and that's the changing nature of global commodity chains. Let me put that a little bit differently. If you're trying to make it through this webinar by surviving on a cup of coffee or maybe a chocolate bar, I mean, that cup of coffee or chocolate bar might have Nestle or Cadbury's written as the brand on it, but when it first started, when that coffee bean was first grown and harvested, or that cocoa pod was first grown and harvested and dried, it's possible that there was a poor, landless farmer in a developing country right at the beginning of that. And it's very possible that you, as a consumer, actually now care about knowing whether there was a farmer, a poor farmer, at the beginning of that chain of you getting your cup of coffee or your chocolate bar. And you might have made your decision on where you bought that coffee or that chocolate bar based on that knowledge. And the farmer, she too probably knew or knows better now than she did 20 years ago what is the value of her product. And certainly, almost certainly, the large producer at the end, the one who knows the most about this right now is probably that big company like Nestle or Cadbury's. They know very well that you as a consumer here have made a decision based on what kind of difference you're making. This wasn't necessarily the case 20 years ago. The second point on this is the changing international development context. This is not new to anyone either. Put simply, there's much less money in overseas development assistance. Last year was the first year, and it was noted in this report, and so you can click on the link if you're interested, the Millennium Development Goals report from 2012, was the first year that we've seen a decrease in ODA from governments, and it's likely going to decrease again next year. This waning support is not new. I mean, we talked about the global recession a moment ago. I mean, taxpayers in developed countries want to pay less taxes. They're asking more and more questions about how their money is being spent, and that's affecting this traditional idea of overseas development assistance. It's also changed because we talked about global commodity chains. I mean, there's a whole bunch of new actors at the table now that are thinking about this farmer, and it's not only a farmer. It could be a textile worker, it could be a taxi driver, it could be a borrower at a credit union or at a bank. There's many more people who are talking about the role of this individual in the development context. And so what that does is that brings together new actors around the table from developed and developing and middle-income countries alike, from governments, from private sector foundations, the private sector, from foundations, from NGOs. The farmers themselves necessarily are at the table. And so that changes the dynamic of a traditional model of developed countries making decisions and assistance being delivered by northern organizations, solely or northern organizations. There's two more links I'll include here that talk a little bit about this. The first one is a report from the North-South Institute, a small think tank here in Ottawa that was just released, that talks a lot about the role of the private sector in this development, and that's a huge change, at least how explicit it's become in the last 3 or 4 years, and the role of private sector organizations in development. And the final link is to a parliamentary report from here in Canada that looked at how the Government of Canada works with private sector foundations. So, changing economic and social conditions, changing international development context, and finally, evidently we're talking about co-ops. 2012 was the International Year of Cooperatives. what better time to start looking at these questions from a cooperative perspective than in 2012, and I know France will be talking a little bit about this in her presentation, which will come up in a few minutes. So, if we agree on why now are we talking about this, why cooperatives? What makes them relevant in this conversation? First, co-ops are a different type of private sector actor. Yes, co-ops operate and act in the private sector. They have to succeed as businesses, but how cooperatives define success is different from other types of businesses. It's more than just having more revenues than liabilities. How co-ops value things matters. It makes a difference in how they pursue international development or how they work in developing countries. In countries like Canada and in other developed countries, they'll often hear about the triple bottom line, which is one manifestation of why co-ops are different. The triple bottom line refers to success not only on the economic front in terms of business, but success on environmentally speaking and success socially or in the communities where they operate. And co-ops, if they're working properly and functioning according to the needs of their members, which are defined democratically, which are based on the demands of the communities where they operate, they'll be doing that. And that's different from other types of private sector actors. First point. Second point, co-ops have multiple impacts. We just mentioned triple bottom lines, environmental, social, and economic, but it's more than that. I mean, co-ops as democratic institutions can, in some societies, be the first place that people are actually living and acting out their democratic principles. I think of a project in El Salvador that CCA worked on for many years, where a woman who previously didn't have a job and had been working, well, I should rephrase that. She worked extremely hard, but not in the formal sector per se, actually joined her cooperative, joined the board. Within 4 years had become mayor of her town. And after 4 years as mayor, she actually left because she knew that it was time to go back to her cooperative and to her family and not stay there inevitably in a position of political privilege. Creating jobs, that example in El Salvador is just one case in point. And then building peace. I mean, co-ops aren't built or aren't designed to build peace. But when you start talking about cooperative models in places like Aceh, which was ravaged by sectarian conflict for the better part of 2 decades, in places like Nepal, where there was a civil war, in places like northern Ghana, where there's constant conflict over resources, it's amazing how democratically making decisions in a co-op can build peace. And then finally, why cooperatives now? Constant innovation. Cooperatives are groupings at their root of entrepreneurs. They're not people who are so as entrepreneurs, they're looking for innovative solutions to the demands in their communities or the demands for products and services that they see in front of them. We sometimes forget that. The difference is that all these co-ops are based on the same principles. I mean, the 7 co-op principles. I'm not going to get into them here. There has been an evolution of these principles over the last 100 years, and Darryl can speak to that afterwards, perhaps. But what makes the difference now is that how cooperatives are being formed and what they're being formed for, and the business opportunities they're serving to, the business sectors they're acting in, and the demands of their members they're responding to are constantly changing. And so you'll find them in all sectors doing all sorts of different things. And so there's a constant innovation that's going on. Perhaps the best example we have here in Canada of how this is recognized is that La Siembra, which is a cooperative member of CCA, a relatively small workers' co-op here in Ottawa, last year was won as on The Big Decision, a reality TV show for businesses, traditionally private sector businesses, you know, in that traditional sense. But no, La Siembra was selected as a source of investment because of the way it innovates and because of the way it operates. And you can find out more about that on their website. That leads me to the discussion of why Canadian cooperatives. Why are we talking about Canadian co-ops and how they make a difference in international development? Well, first of all, scale, diversity, and success. I mean, I just mentioned La Siembra, which is a relatively small workers' co-op. I think there's between 10 and 15 members here. But you have co-ops like that one, but then you can grow to multi-billion-dollar enterprises that are acting in all sectors, finance, in retail, in agriculture. And you can see the statistics now on your screen. There's over 9,000 co-ops in Canada, serving more than 18 million members. They're in all sectors. They employ more than 150,000 people and are led by more than 100,000 volunteers. And that asset figure of $370 billion is quite staggering. And now you'll see some of the better-known brands of these co-ops, and depending on what part of the country you're in, if you're listening in from Canada, certainly some of these you'll recognize. So that's why Canadian co-ops matter in the first instance. It's because of the size, scale, and diversity of the sector. The second reason is commitment. Now, over the last 20 years, and when SOCODEVI, DID, and CCA were looking at the role of Canadian co-ops in development, we looked at what they had contributed to international development. I mentioned how the paradigm in international development has changed from being, government basically giving money to northern organizations to then do development. Well, with co-ops in Canada, that's never been the case. I mean, we looked back 20 years, and what we found was that over 300 person-years of support have been given to CCA, SOCODEVI, and DID. So we're talking about Canadians with expertise working in partnership, Canadians with expertise, for instance, in credit unions, working in partnership with credit unions in countries around the world as volunteers. They're taking their holidays to do it, they're taking time off work to do it, and over the last 20 years, between the three organizations, we've got over 300 years of support that have been provided. That's volunteer time. But they also put their money where their mouth is. To leverage the work that CCA, SOCODEVI, and DID have done, more than $40 million has been contributed by Canadian cooperators, so that's by the institutions, such as the big co-ops, which you saw on the previous slide, but also by individuals within the sector to support the work of these organizations. So there's a real commitment from the sector to working in international development. And then finally, why Canadian cooperatives? Partnership. This idea that delivering northern assistance has never been part of the DNA of the co-op sector in Canada. We succeed, if CCA, SOCODEVI, and DID succeed in their work with the cooperative sector in developing countries, it's because we've always worked in partnership across a variety of sectors. We talked a little bit about corporations or big private sector actors a few minutes ago, Nestle, Cadbury's, and others. You know what? CCA, SOCODEVI, and DID have partnered for a long time with organizations like that when we talk about the role of local cooperatives. We talked, Aaron, in presenting the webinar today, talked about the research partnership that's at the heart of this webinar series. You know what? SOCODEVI, DID, and CCA have worked in partnership with academic institutions in Canada and developing countries for the better part of 30 years. And we continue to do so in new programming. We work with private foundations like MasterCard and Gates. We work with national, provincial, and municipal governments in Canada and in developing countries. I mean, SOCODEVI is on the line, and I think of this incredible project they have with the city of Beijing in China, which has assistance from the provincial government of Yunnan to set up agricultural cooperatives. I mean, CCA has recently started working with the Ministry of Trade and Commerce in Barbados to look at how co-ops can be a foundation for small and medium enterprise development. So this is not new to us. And then, of course, and this is my final point, we've worked for a long time in a very productive partnership with the Government of Canada through the Canadian International Development Agency. This is a relationship which all three organizations, CCA, SOCODEVI, and DID, see as one of constant learning. We learn from CEDA how we can be more effective actors in a changing context for governments like the Government of Canada when it comes to development assistance. And we hope through our engagement with CEDA that CEDA is also benefiting from our sector expertise as a different type of private sector actor that is measuring value and measuring impact differently from other organizations. To tell you a little bit about how we do this, we'll pass this on to my colleagues, France and Alain, and so take it away, folks.
Thanks so much, Michael, for kicking us off on a strong foot. So, France, if you want to pull up your PowerPoint, I'll go ahead and introduce you to the group. So France Michaud has worked as a communications supervisor at Développement International Desjardins for the past 10 years. And DID is a component of the Desjardins Group, which is the leading cooperative financial group in Canada. Its goal is to make secure and diversified financial services accessible to all, including the poorest. So France is involved in all communication activities at DID, and she holds a bachelor's degree in agronomy, a master's degree in public communications, and a master's degree in business administration, all from Laval University in Quebec City. So, France, I'd like to invite you to show your screen now. Okay?
Yeah, is it good?
Yes, yes. Go, take it away. Thanks so much.
All right. Well, hello, everyone. Now, with this presentation, I wish to show how current and pertinent the cooperative model is in the financial sector more particularly, both in the north, where financial co-ops managed to do much better than banks throughout the recent financial crisis, but also in the south, where co-ops have a tremendous contribution in reaching greater financial inclusion. That is, local co-ops, but also, as Michael outlined, Canadian financial co-ops that are partnering and sharing their experience with these local southern cooperatives. First, in Canada, as you may know, in Canada, 1 out of 3 individuals is a member of a Caisse Populaire or a credit union. In total, there are 900 Caisse or credit unions in the country. These financial institutions have total assets of more than $250 billion. That's over 10% of total assets of all deposit-taking institutions. That's more than 13% of all savings collected, 14% of all loans given out, and 37% of all bank-type service centers, which is proof of the greater accessibility provided by co-ops. So financial co-ops hold a very important place, as you can see, on the financial market in Canada. In developing and emerging countries now, to understand the importance of financial cooperatives in these countries, maybe it's good to first outline the situation as to financial inclusion in these countries, which is absolutely different than ours. According to the World Bank, 2.5 billion individuals, that is 3/4 of the world's poor, still do not have an account in a formal financial institution. This financial exclusion is not only due to poverty, but also to the high cost of financial services, to the distance that must too often be traveled by people to reach a bank outlet, and all the paperwork that is involved with accessing these financial services. According to recent surveys, co-ops reach significantly more individuals and families than other financial institutions, making them the actors who are truly responsible for improving access to financial services for all. Co-ops help overcome the obstacles that were shown on the previous slides, and they do that in many ways. First, by being open to all, which is the first cooperative principle. By making members participate economically also. The members start creating collective wealth by participating in the social capital of their co-op, and it's also by pooling the savings collected that loans can be given out. Co-ops also help by being closer, including in rural areas. They provide education, and they help people understand how financial services work, which is a lot for these people. And of course, they adjust to members' needs, meaning that they won't only make financial services more accessible and more affordable, but also secure and diversified. Recently, some events had microfinance making headlines for its negative impact. You may have heard, for example, of the events that took place in India, where a political party advised over-indebted clients of microfinance institutions to no longer repay their loans since the interest rates were considered too high and collection methods unscrupulous. Cooperative principles act as a safeguard against such risks and such overly aggressive practices. First, their action is based on collective ownership and governance. They also have sounder practices. They rely on the savings and the capital of their members as sources of financing, which makes them more independent and more resilient to external shocks, but also less tolerant to taking excessive risks. And cooperatives contribute to educating, training, and informing their members. By doing so, they help them to better understand credit, to evaluate their borrowing capacity, and to understand the commitments that they're making when they take out a loan, therefore preventing over-indebtedness. So in brief, unlike profit-oriented financial institutions, co-ops pursue sustainable prosperity. They create wealth sustainably by offering accessible and secure financial services. Everywhere around the world recently, co-ops clearly demonstrated their resilience by riding out the recent financial crisis of 2008 to 2009. This can be explained by the factors that I just presented on the previous slide. In fact, all along the crisis, co-ops remained more accessible and attractive to all. Numerous bank clients even turned to co-ops because these co-ops inspired more confidence. The result was increased membership, assets, and volumes of savings for these cooperatives. Also, while banks were slowing down their lending activities, co-ops were able to continue this activity that is so essential for recovery. In the U.S. only, credit volume decreased by 0.4% in banks, while it increased by 6.7% in cooperatives. And finally, nowhere were cooperatives obliged to seek government aid. In brief, co-ops are much more than a simple alternative to the traditional banking model, and for this reason, they should play an important part in redefining the global financial sector. Yet co-ops sometimes find themselves operating outside the limits set by current definitions and systems. For example, when it comes to regulating cooperatives, governments often find that the traditional bank laws are not suitable. This calls for openness and special efforts both from cooperatives and from lawmakers. In a general manner, the importance and the specific nature of cooperatives must be recognized in order for them to fully assume their role in redefining the global financial sector. That was one of the main themes that was addressed last October in Quebec City at the International Summit of Cooperatives. DID and its partners were present in this event, and they took an active part in it. Even 5 of our partners, who are all representatives of the Proxima International Network, they were speakers during this event. They presented various winning practices and innovations, such as the index-based crop insurance product that was developed for rice growers in Sri Lanka. So our partner in Sri Lanka, he really made it clear that it was possible to find innovative ways to make financial services, even like insurance, accessible for people. And together, these partners, they prove that co-ops can make financial services more inclusive while being efficient, performance-driven, and profitable. Now, I'd like to conclude this presentation with a few examples of other cooperative successes. In Burkina Faso, for example, over 75% of individuals with access to financial services do business with the RCPB network of financial cooperatives, making it by far the biggest inclusive financial institution in the country. The RCPB currently has 177 service outlets. It has 1,000 employees and assets worth $253 million. Maybe that's a number that will not impress many North Americans, but knowing that the average loan in Africa is less than $1,000, then you realize that these 250 million mean many, many people reached. The RCPB provides financial services to 1.6 million members in both rural and urban areas. The RCPB has also pushed the inter-cooperation principle up to the point where it decided to create a regional confederation with 5 other cooperative networks covering 4 other West African countries, all of them being dominant financial institutions in their respective countries in terms of financial inclusion. In Lithuania, the network of Lithuanian financial cooperatives is the only locally owned financial institution, since all banks operating there are owned by foreign interests. It therefore provides key leverage for the country's socioeconomic development. Despite its short history, this institution already had an excellent reputation, and the opinions of its managers are regularly sought on various questions related to development of the country's financial sector. And finally, in Haiti, 45% of individuals with access to financial services do business with the Federation of Financial Cooperatives that is called Le Levier. Thanks to its deep roots in the community, this network has played a key role in the reconstruction efforts of Haiti since the earthquake that shook the population in the country in January of 2010. The fact that the base cooperatives that are integrating Le Levier are part of a federated network that makes them much stronger and help them survive the economic difficulties that resulted from the earthquake. Today, most of the indicators posted by Le Levier show a clear growth compared to 2008, in spite of the tragic events of 2010. So this concludes this chapter about co-ops and financial inclusion. I'll be very pleased to answer your questions or provide you with more details or example after the presentation.
Thank you very much, France, for that. That was wonderful. I think you really helped, give us a bit of detail that allows us to sort of visualize when we're talking about these partnerships internationally. So now I would like to invite Alain to prepare your presentation, and I'll just give an introduction so that the group knows a bit more about Alain. So Alain Plouffe is the Technical Director of SOCODEVI. So he's an engineer, and he has a master's in business management in cooperatives that he received from the Université de Sherbrooke, and a postgraduate degree in project management of engineering and urban studies. He also works in international development and has done so since 1984. He's lived and worked in Latin America, the Caribbean, Africa, and Asia, where he held various roles in simple and complex projects, in small and large projects, with private, bilateral, and multilateral donors. So we're very excited to have Alain with us today. So Alain, I'll ask you to share your screen now. Okay.
So thank you, Erin, and I will follow on the previous presentation, but focusing on a specific topic of our work in international cooperation, which is connecting small producer to international markets. So SOCODEVI is working in many aspects of international cooperation and supporting different kind of co-ops, but among these co-ops are agricultural co-ops, and among these co-ops, many are owned and managed by small farmers. So the topic that I will present is related to these small farmers, the one that Michaud was talking about previously when he was talking about small farmer producing coffee or other crops. So why are we focusing about supporting small farmers to reach international market? It's a question that needs to be raised because many believe that small farmers should first and foremost produce only for their internal market. But we believe that in many cases this is not possible or it's not the best solution for them. In some instances, for example, coffee and cocoa is mostly drink in countries where it is not produced. This is particularly true for cocoa. In many countries where it's possible to produce cocoa, people use it to produce chocolate, but most of this production cannot be consumed locally. And the same thing is true for coffee. Most of the people producing coffee cannot drink all this coffee, although it can be sold in the international market. In some other instances, people are producing local food, but all these foods are coming at the same time on the market, and then their local market is not very adequate for them. The prices are going down because of the excess of production locally available. And the other aspect, and in some cases, there's a higher value available for a small farmer if they can sell their product on the international market. So for these three reasons, we have decided that in some cases, it's possible and suitable to support small farmers to reach international markets. But when they try to do this, they are with many challenges, obviously. One of these challenges is they often are producing with very low standards, and they don't always meet the requirement for international certification or international norm related to quality of their product or the safety of their product. Some small farmers use in excess pesticide or other chemicals. The second challenge is they are facing international competition. When a small farmer, let's say in Colombia, is producing coffee, he has to face the competition from neighboring countries like Peru or Brazil, but also from Vietnam. And it's hard for them to know exactly what the other are making or what the impact of the other's production on the international market. Many farmers, small farmers, don't have access to finance to either invest in their production or be able to support their marketing of their product. And many of them also live in very remote area, far from the export market, so it's hard for them alone by themselves to produce or to sell their products to the international market. Finally, small farmers don't have easy. It's not easy for a small farmer to have access to the evolution of the taste of consumer in the country where their products are being sold. For instance, when you are talking about mangoes, the evolution of the taste of consumer in northern countries has been very rapid during the last 5 to 10 years, and what was considered a very good mango 5 years ago or 10 years ago, now it's considered not such a good mangoes compared to others. But when you are a farmer and you have an orchard of trees, it's not easy for you to adapt yourself to this rapid evolution of the taste of consumer. Finally, small farmers are facing natural risks, and many of them have very low yield because they don't use adequate technologies or adequate kind of seeds to produce what they are producing. These challenges have also we also need to mention challenges for those who want to buy from small farmers. There are many people in northern countries who would like, for different reasons, to buy from small farmers. Michael mentioned at the beginning that there are some organizations that focus on buying to small farmers, but they are also facing problems. Some of them are standardization. Most consumers in northern or in international market are expecting to receive a very standardized product. When they are talking about mangoes, they want mangoes of the same size. When they are talking about coffee, they want the coffee with a very regular taste, not evolve, and the same is true for cocoa or other products. So they cannot accept production that is changing from week to week. International market also usually require the product all year long, so they don't consider that in some countries, even if you produce mangoes only 2 or 3 months each year, they are trying to satisfy the needs of the consumer 12 months each year. So for them, they are looking for providers who will be able to give them their product 12 months in a row and not only 3 months. Also, the market in our countries most of the time are expecting big volumes. They don't want to buy 1 ton or 1 container. They want to buy many containers or sometimes even boats of international product. Obviously, they are also looking for very fresh at a low cost. Even if they are looking for a very standardized, high-quality product, the cost is always remaining a very important topic. And they don't want to trade with 200 small farmers. And when you are a company like Nestle or even other kind of companies, you want to buy with a few people if it's possible. So for all these reasons, co-ops can play a very important role to support small farmers to have access to international market. We consider that they provide part of the solution, if not always all of it. So co-op, depending on the value chain, can play different roles. In some countries, they are very active on the entire value chain, and I will provide some example later. In some other countries, they are focusing more on some aspect of the value chain. But in all cases, they must always provide efficient services with impact at the member level, and this is very important for co-op. Co-op has been put in place to provide efficient services, first and foremost, for the members. So if the members cannot receive those services at a low cost, those members and very often will sell their product to other organizations or other traders that are already working on their market. So co-op need to be efficient. And they must also show strong governance in order for these co-ops to sustain on the long term. Otherwise, there will always be problems in terms of management, quality of management, transparency, and that will always bring the co-op near to extinction. While the co-op, and all these things need to be made while the co-op obviously is making profit. Co-op, as we already said, are businesses. They need to make profit, although they need to provide more services to the people. So these are also challenging, but it can be done if we want to sustain co-ops on the long term. And in order for us, organizations that want to support the emergence or the consolidation of co-ops, we must acknowledge that it's a long process. It cannot be done in 2 or 3 years, and there's a speed limit in the changes that people we are supporting can benefit from. When I'm talking, we are referring to a speed limit. We are requiring some people with very sometimes low skill in terms of management to learn many, many things at the same time and to change their habits, their way of working, their way of making business. And this cannot be successful if you try to impose any changes or if you try to impose a rhythm of changes that's too fast for the people. So I will provide rapidly 3 examples. In West Africa, we have been working with 60 co-op in the country where it's called Cocoa Belt, so Côte d'Ivoire, Ghana, Nigeria, and Cameroon. These co-op has been working, and we are supporting them actually to work with international companies who buy their cocoa. In this example, the co-op are providing support in quality control, buying process, and certification, but are not exporting by themselves. We international, with SOCODEVI, supporting them in terms of governance, but in each co-op receiving specific diagnosis and specific training, which is very important. We help, in that case, we help them to establish commercial relation with buyers, but we are not ourselves involved in this relation. In Guatemala, we've been supporting a federation of small cooperatives, and in that case, they are exporting cardamom. Cardamom is, and after making a value chain analysis with all these farmers and leaders, we've decided with them to focus on organic cardamom, but not only organic cardamom, training in production, certification. Actually, this co-op is the world's first exporter of cardamom nowadays, and is producing and exporting more than 600 metric tons of cardamom each year. In Bolivia, we have been supporting a union of small co-ops, more or less in the same ways than in Guatemala, but in that case, it's producing oregano. Those people were used to grow corn, and they were very poor growing corn because of the local market were not satisfactory for them. Now producing oregano, they've been involved to diversify their sources of income, and the co-op has been able to export to, I made a mistake, it's not Argentina, it's Uruguay and Brazil. And in that case, the co-op's playing different roles from preparing the seedlings to buying and selling on the international market. So, and what have we learned? And in order to terminate my presentation, it can be very risky to get involved on the international market, and we cannot take risks with the poor assets. So when we are working with them, we need to be very cautious. Private companies, when you work with international or local private companies, are unpredictable. The market changes faster than the mentality of small farmers. And many external factors can have a positive or negative impact on what you are doing. Finally, when you do this, we have to listen to our instincts, and that's it for my presentation for now.
That's wonderful. Thanks so much, Alain. We appreciate it, and I want to acknowledge you for making the time and space to make this all work, because you're in Colombia right now, right?
Yes, I'm in Colombia. It's much warmer than in Canada, according to what Michaud was saying.
So we thank you, but we're jealous and a little bit resentful too. Okay, I'm going to introduce Darryl Reed now. Darryl, we've had a full presentation and lots for you to respond to. I'll ask that you pull your PowerPoint up. I'll introduce you to the group. So Darryl Reed teaches in the Business and Society program at York University. His research interests include business ethics, corporate social responsibility, and international regulation, among others. His primary research focus, however, is on the social economy in the context of development, with a special emphasis on cooperatives and fair trade movements. With a background in both ethics and political economy, Professor Reed brings a broad interdisciplinary analysis to the field of the social economy and development. And he currently also serves as the president of the Canadian Association for Studies in Cooperation. So, Darryl, I'm going to give you the cue to share your screen.
Thanks, everyone. I want to thank the previous speakers, and I really want to acknowledge the wonderful work that the co-op sector has done in Canada. When you travel abroad, you really get a sense of how special in Canada we've been, in some sense, in terms of the international development work done by cooperatives. So this is wonderful. Having said that, we also need to acknowledge how our efforts are sort of dwarfed by the needs out there, and what the needs for more development initiatives, right? So in my response, I'm going to focus sort of a series of questions for the speakers, and some of the questions they've already answered, but really, what is the role of the co-op sector as a development actor is what we really want to look at. So first question I have for them is sort of the process. How do they go through the process of deciding upon what they're going to do as organizations? All organizations need to do that, and these organizations do, but we could get a little bit more explicit about that. And in that context, then, it leads to the second question, because we're going to talk about international development. We have to have some understanding of that, and everybody does, and the question is, what are those understandings, and how reflected are they, and where do they come from? So does their understanding of development come from local and regional development models? Are they basing what they do on successful cases? Does it come from discourses with local cooperatives and local cooperative networks? And obviously, some of the speakers have talked a little bit about that. And how much is it influenced by funding sources as well? What are those sorts of pressures that come in terms of how they develop their programming? Oops. Somehow I went from 2 to 4. I'm not sure how that happened. I think I confused 3 and 4 here. The next question, though, is the strategies. In going about development, what do they hope to do with their programs? So, for example, when we have financial cooperatives, one of the goals might be to extend those cooperatives and replicate those cooperatives in other places, especially geographically. And these are the types of things I think that France referred to in terms of how cooperatives are working together and financial cooperatives and joining networks, and how these organizations can help that process. Another key issue, I think, is sort of the scaling up of production. Often in terms of development, we talk about the subsistence economy, and the question is whether development initiatives really just allow people to survive, or whether, as the title of their report says, whether it helps create wealth as well. So get beyond the subsistence economy, and in order to do that, do we need to scale up production? I think Alain was referring to the need for capacity to deal with large buyers. How do we do that, or how do they do that, and doing that? But also another question is, are they able to move up those value chains to capture more of that value in the chain? Because you can be in an international value chain, selling your coffee to a large coffee company like Nestle, and still be treated very poorly and have only a subsistence income at best, right? So are there ways that we help promote local cooperatives move up the value chain into processing and other things so they get more of the value added? Another aspect then is how they help facilitate the integration of different components of economic development in terms of finance, primary production, processing, distribution, marketing, and all those different aspects. And a key thing here, which wasn't focused on as much, is how much the cooperative sector actually engages with cooperatives in the South as business partners and not just as donors or resource providers. That's happened in some places, especially with large cooperative supermarkets in Europe, but, you know, do all cooperatives have purchasing policies and things like this where they actually promote cooperative to cooperative business relations? Here's the second.
Darryl, you've got about 1 minute left. Sorry for the rush.
Yeah, that's okay. So we're going to get through that. So the fourth question is, who do they collaborate with? And we've heard some examples of that. Are they local cooperatives and cooperative networks? Do they cooperate with the major fair trade producer organizations, the regional cooperative bodies? We know they cooperate with development agencies, local governments in the South, and I think Alain referred to this, and Michaud as well, and with other northern cooperatives like cooperative development agencies in the UK, Europe, and other places as well. And what are they collaborating on? Is it just learning? Is it replication of best practices? Are they sharing resources? Division of labor. So, these societies can't do everything in Africa. Is there division of labor where people work in different sectors or different places geographically? Is there any coordination and specialization? And the last slide then, what are the challenges and responses? What factors inhibit cooperatives from more effectively promoting development? Is it local governments and legal structures? And we heard some talk about that, the lack of infrastructure, lack of resources, or coordination and collaboration problems and learning. Are we gathering the knowledge that we need to help us be smarter in what we do and more efficient? And so what are the key priorities that the speakers have, and how do they think they can be more effectively addressed? I'm done, Erin.
Wow, Darryl, thanks so much. That was certainly a lot to digest in this presentation in terms of the three speakers, and then I think that you, as any good academic does, also brings to us, a number of further reflections and questions to kind of be critical and reflective on the process. So we really appreciate that. I want to, I know that we have just a few minutes left together. We've got a few people on the line, but I'll ask that when I'll call on you to ask your questions, and you can raise your hand on the GoToWebinar menu as well. But I will, I'll ask that you introduce yourself first, and then as the speakers respond, feel free to also provide reflections on some of what Darryl Reed has just presented in terms of his questions as well. So I'll start with Justin Ellerby. Justin, do you want to press star 2 to unmute and introduce yourself and give us your question in brief?
Yes, thank you very much, Erin. Hi, folks. Thanks to all the presenters. My name's Justin Ellerby. I'm in the MBA in Community Economic Development program at Cape Breton University, and did an undergrad in International Ag Development. So really appreciate the topic. My question, Darryl, you started to touch on this, but I do wonder in some of the popular press, fair trade in general has taken a bit of a beating in terms of what it really means. Ethical consumers have been a bit disappointed sometimes with the level of economic returns that are available to producers. And then on the other hand, at least in America, where I'm from, to my knowledge, the food co-ops, grocery co-ops have been unable to exert really hardly any market pressure up the value chain. And some of the strategies that you mentioned there, it seems to me to point to a possibility of a multi-stakeholder cooperative sort of approach to be able to capture some control at either end of these value chains. Is there any work that's being done there? Is there any? You mentioned European grocery co-ops seem to have done some work in that regard. What would be the challenges there?
Go ahead, Darryl. Thanks, Justin.
We could do a whole couple of hours on that, and I don't want to take up all the time. But quickly, there's been lots of problems in fair trade because there's been a split in the movement, as you're well, with the UK, with the US organization. And the basic question is whether fair trade is just about small producers or whether you also allow estate production in. And the concern that small producers have is when you allow estate production in, then it's sort of unfair competition for them, because then the large corporations who are involved in fair trade are just not going to work with small producers anymore for reasons that Alain said, because they don't want to work with 200,000 people or farmers, right? And so the local producer organizations in Latin America, less so in Africa, have been developing their own brand to identify their products as coming from small producers, right? And how do they market then? They've been able to do that more successfully in Europe because you have the larger co-op retailers, and they then are able to compete and force the other large supermarkets to adopt, producer-owned products, right? It's harder in the U.S. and Canada because we don't have the same sort of large cooperative supermarket chains. So it becomes more of a challenge, and a lot more pressure then gets put on education campaigns, consumer campaigns to do that, because we don't have the large co-ops that can take the lead and help us do that. That's about all I think I can say in this short time.
Thanks very much, Darryl. I will take, I think we're about at the end of the hour together, so what I'll do is just give you a bit of information in terms of how you can access this information once we leave here today, but also we'll keep the line open for about another 10 minutes because I know some people have questions and we want to be able to address those as well, but we want to respect the time for folks that only allotted an hour for this. So if you visit our website at cooperativedifference.coop, we will have, later on today actually, in a few hours, I'll have the links to all of these PowerPoints. And also, within a couple of weeks, we'll probably have the video of this up as well. So if you want to share it with colleagues or review it yourself, it will be available. And I will send an email to everyone who's attended today with the links to that, and also a small survey to get your feedback on these webinars and to offer suggestions for future webinar topics. So I want to thank all of the speakers for all of your preparations and for making it here today and for sharing with us some of the incredible work that your organizations and yourselves are doing. And also to everyone who's contributed by participating and offering your questions as well. So again, we'll keep the line open for 10 minutes, but for those who have to leave, thank you very much. Okay. So now we'll go ahead and turn it over to Michelle Dupuis. Are you still here? You can press star 2 to unmute to ask your question.
Thank you so much. I am still here. I wanted to thank everyone for their presentation. Can you hear me? Let's make sure first.
Yes, go right ahead, and please introduce yourself.
Oh, thank you. So my name is Michelle Dupuis, and I work with Cross-Cultural International Business Solutions. I learned a great deal from your presentation, so thank you very much. I had one question. I know that a few of your organizations testified to the House of Commons Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development in their research for the report on the role of the private sector in international development that came out in November. And I just wanted to ask on your reflections on this new strategic direction that's being recommended by the committee, and whether you think it'll allow for the cooperative movement to deal with the challenges and potentially replicate the successes that you have identified in your presentations today. And if you have any other thoughts on the report, that would be great too. So that's my question. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Alain, do we want to start with you?
Just to say that we haven't been present there, but we read the document in very short. There's part of the orientation when the government is wanting to work more with the private sector, and as Michael was mentioning from the beginning, we have to present the co-op as part of the private sector, and we have to present our realization of having involved the private sector since the beginning. And so it can be an opportunity if we use it correctly. I will just say that for now.
Okay, we've got Michael.
Thank you for the question, Michelle. CCA did not make an oral presentation to the committee, but we did submit a short brief, which we can make available with this webinar without too much difficulty. And I'll agree with Alain's analysis and just quote you the summary from our brief, which states, quote, cooperatives are a form of private enterprise that is uniquely adaptable to development purposes. Like all successful businesses, co-ops generate economic growth, but that growth will be much more equitably distributed than other forms of enterprise and can be more easily and specifically focused on the poor. So that was the summary of our presentation to the committee, and that'll be available with the material from this webinar. So, France, I think DID did make a presentation to the committee.
Yes, I'm sorry, I just missed your last words because I was unmuting.
No, that Desjardins, I think, was present before the committee. I believe someone did present to the committee.
I think so also. If it was not this time, it was at a previous such meeting, but we also do agree with this focus on developing the private sector being such a, first, co-ops being part of this private sector, but also the private sector being so important. And we believe in the importance of local empowerment and giving private businesses, and mostly small businesses, the power to play its role in local growth and local economy. So this was I think mainly our point of view, agreeing with this strong focus.
Thank you very much, France, and thank you for your question, Michelle. I'd like to move on now to Réjean Laflamme. Réjean, do you want to start by introducing yourself and providing your question? Thanks.
Réjean Laflamme, I'm the co-op consultant, and I'm also a board member of SOCODEVI. Hans, you mentioned your role or the role of the ID in Haiti. Mm-hmm. The Minister for CIDA has been very critical about what Canada was doing or not doing in Haiti. So I'd like to hear from the three of you about what we have done in terms of making sure that the co-op sector was well represented and really making a difference in Haiti, and what we can send as a message to the minister responsible for CIDA.
Yes. Well, first, as DID is concerned and our Haitian partners, what we can say is that we've been working for a very long time, and we've developed a very close relationship with a local actor, which is the Levier network of financial cooperatives. And this organization is very deeply rooted in the Haitian community, and it has proven very successful. Its results have proven very, very successful, both in the reconstruction efforts, but more globally in participating in the improvement of living conditions for Haitians. So we have good results to show. We've, much has been said about, the critics have been received regarding the efficiency of the aid that was provided to this country. So, as I said, working with a local and deeply rooted partner, I think that was very good and very efficient. And we try to see the decision of CIDA as a decision to maybe think of the best ways, maybe take a pause or a break with their aid to Haiti, and try to identify the best possible ways of doing things in the future. So we try to see it in a positive way. And we have, as I said, very positive results to show in favor of pursuing local or development aid in this region.
Thank you very much for that. Does anyone else want to contribute towards that question from Réjean?
This is Alain from SOCODEVI. Just in short, we were not very present in Haiti, but we had a small program before the earthquake, and we kept on after working, not in the reconstruction effort. So there's, in those critics, a lot of probably justify related to the high cost of the reconstruction effort and the results that are not so visible in many areas of the country. But where we were working, which is outside Port-au-Prince, the earthquake has very small effect. People were without water at their home, without electricity. It was like this before and still like this. Co-ops we have been putting in place are successful right now in two sectors, in the fishery sector and also in agricultural sector. But there are still some small organizations, and they are facing all the problems of the market in Port-au-Prince, which is a real bottleneck for development of every agricultural activities within this country. So I agree with France when she said that maybe it's important for the Canadian government to rethink the way it wants to support the long-term development of IT. And maybe co-op should be considered among the most successful things that can be done there, especially in rural area. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Alain. Michaud?
Yeah, like SOCODEVI, CCA is not present at all actually right now. So unlike SOCODEVI, which has a small presence, we don't have any in Haiti to speak of. But I'd like to echo the statements by France and Alain saying that how we're understanding success from a cooperative point of view is different than in other development projects. And as a result, it means that cooperatives can play a unique role in the development of places like Haiti where the situation is so difficult. But Alain and France have described it better than I could, so I'll leave it at that.
Thanks very much. So I just have a couple comments to share, and that is that they've come from people who have now since left our webinar, but they've said thanks so much to the speakers. One person commented specifically to you, Alain, to say that sometimes they find webinars they've attended to be really high level and that they appreciate the detail that you got into in terms of your reflections. So I want to acknowledge you for that. So I think that we're going to close it there. I want to thank everyone for your time and your questions, to the presenters for their preparation and their work. And again, we'll make these materials available to you. And do visit us at cooperativedifference.coop to learn about the webinars that are coming up. And if you want, you can sign up for our newsletters and to get notices about these webinars in the future, so that if you forget to check the website, we'll contact you. Okay, thanks everyone. Take care.